watching Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Prashant, and this is a special Zoom episode owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we'll be taking a look at a number of important stories, such as a recent report on forcible displacement, the tragic and horrific shooting of children in the United States, and a new report on lobbying at the World Health Organization. So, in our first story, we're going to be looking at the UN Refugee Agency's report on the number of forcibly displaced people across the world. The number has crossed 100 million this year. Now, the UN has called this a staggering estimate and one which should never have taken place. The Ukraine war, of course, was responsible for this increase in numbers, but this is a problem that has been building up for decades now, especially due to war and imperialist interventions in many parts of the world. We have with us Abdul to talk more about this report, what are its implications, and the hypocrisy demonstrated by countries of the West. Thank you, Abdul, so much for joining us. So, staggering numbers we have here are 100 million, which is massive considering how the problem has escalated over the years. Could you maybe first tell us what the report cites as the reasons for this huge number and the increase of forcibly displaced people?
Well, the reasons are obviously the different conflicts which are going on some of them are going on for decades, some of them are recent ones. Then the state persecution of different, maybe minorities or some political persecution, and so on and so forth. Then there are also reasons related to war. We know that there are wars going on in different parts of the world. Some of them are imperialist interventions in countries like Libya, in Syria, and other parts of the world, in African countries. And some of them are like recent Ukrainian war. So all these things clubbed together. Since this data is primarily about the people displaced through war and conflict and violence, it does not include people displaced from climate emergencies and other things. So these are the main things cited in the report. Yeah.
Right. So in this context, would you also tell us about some of the other aspects that the report talks about? When are the recommendations regarding, or the descriptions regarding the gravity of the situation, or recommendations regarding what has to be done?
Well, the report cites that the number of displaced has doubled since 2012. It means in 10 years, when in 2012 the total number was around 41 million, now it has reached 100 million, so more than doubled in that sense. It also says that majority of the people who are displaced are still living in their own countries. Means they are internally displaced, internally displaced people. So this idea that a large number of refugees are going to the first world countries and so on and so forth does not stand, because related facts is that most of the people who are also refugees, majority of them live in the third world countries, the neighboring countries, like Afghans living in Pakistan, or the Syrians living in Turkey or Lebanon, and African people from Congo and other parts living in their neighboring countries or within the country. So this basically was the myth that the hype created around refugee influx and so on and so forth, which is used by European Union and US for that matter. It talks about when it comes to solution. Of course, it's talked of there are intermediary issues. For example, how to manage their stay, how to give them a dignified life, the people who are displaced, the refugees in other parts. So, of course, the international aid, increased international aid, and all those things are there. Because most of the countries from where these are displaced are also economically not well off countries. So it is very difficult for them to manage them. So they need international finances. But ultimate solution for this, of course, is the stability and peace. It means the end of all kind of international interventions, the imperialist wars which are waged in different parts of the world, and a resolution of conflicts such as the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land and so on and so on and so other things. So it basically talks about the world to take serious efforts to basically resolve the issues which cause conflict, which cause war in the international politics.
Right, Abdul, in this context, of course, this report also throwing into prominence is the fact that the standards of the West are quite duplicitous or hypocritical when it comes to refugees. So we talk about that as well.
Of course, before this Ukrainian crisis, of course, it has created a huge number of refugees, around 5 to 6 million people going to neighboring countries, which these refugees were welcomed by all the neighboring European countries, and it became for them it became the humanitarian cause. But within a few months back, when this Ukrainian crisis started, we saw how they treated the refugees from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan. They were fired upon. They were basically called intruders, and so on and so forth. A large number of refugees who are trying to basically escape the conflict and war and poverty from Africa are not allowed to enter European Union, and there are a large number of them every year die in the sea because they're drawn, and because their ships are not allowed to board the European coast. So all those things are there. Then we saw how during the Trump regime, US prevented a large number of refugees from entering the US and forced them to live in inhuman conditions on the Mexican border. So all those things are there. Even now, if you see the UK's policy about immigrants and migrations, when it comes to there is a transitional hub created in Rwanda and so on and so forth. But when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, they are also providing aid to people who are willing to kind of host them. So all these things clearly exposes West's double standards when it comes to refugees, and the report and other people who have commented on the report they have highlighted it, and of course it will be good if such hypocritic practices end.
Thank you so much, Abdul, for talking to us. Our next story is from the United States, where a new report has said that American private companies actually lobbied sections of its own government to gain more access to the World Health Organization and have a greater say in its policies. The focus of this report, which is published in Global Health Governance, is on an entity called Engaging America's Global Leadership. Now, this entity brought together breast milk supplement makers, biotechnology firms, alcohol manufacturers, and a wide variety of companies which wanted to influence the WHO's policies. We have with us Anna of the People's Health Movement to talk more about this entity and US lobbying efforts in general. So thank you, Anna, so much for joining us. So let's first take a look at this entity called EAGL, that's Engaging America's Global Leadership. So could you give us the context in which this entity was set up and what its aims were and functionalities were?
Yes, so it's quite an interesting question and quite an interesting entity, which comes up somewhere in 2016. It's interesting because it brings together different industries. So it's not, it's not only about tobacco anymore. Now it's about alcohol beverages. It's about processed foods. It's about breast milk substitutes. So all of these companies and all of these industries seems to be coming together under an umbrella organization, and together they're trying to lobby and to push their interests on the U.S. government, and then indirectly also on the WHO and on other international organizations. Of course, it's important to point out why they're doing this. So they're doing this because together it's easier to basically influence and to act on the industry's main worry, which is the same. Nevertheless, the interest of the industry is the same, regardless of whether we're talking about tobacco or alcohol or food. So all of them are worried that stricter public health international norms are going to impede trade, and of course that would cause a loss to their profits. They don't want to see that happening. And that's why they are deciding to invest more money in making sure that the WHO does not do that, so that it keeps aside and that it does the basic work if it already has to do something. To achieve this goal, they have spent in the period from 2016 to 2019 about $40 million, which is already higher than was spent before. So with with EAGL coming into the picture, basically the lobbying money goes up. Then in 2020, of course, we have seen a completely different situation coming up, also because of the pandemic. And so in 2020, the funds allocated to lobbying were about 46 million. And this is quite interesting also to consider, because 2020 was, of course, the year when the Trump administration said that the US would stop funding the WHO and that it would leave the organization. And so the report does, bring these two things into correlation, because previously, of course, the industry has also been lobbying for, in one way or another, for ensuring that the WHO is weaker and it's less able to act on some of the key public health policies that it's supposed to discuss.
Right, and so could you also tell us in this context, what was the role this organization and general American lobbying efforts played during the pandemic itself?
Yes, so as I mentioned before, it's also quite connected to what they were doing before the pandemic came up. And that's, we can speak about two major things. So one of the things is that the money went towards lobbying for specific programs on the one hand. So, it's WHO documents which define approach to non-communicable diseases. They include introducing higher taxes on ultra-processed foods, on alcohol, on sugary drinks, and so on. On the other hand, the money also went on influencing how the WHO functions and how it's funded. And this also, it targets, in a way, defunding the WHO and therefore weakening its role. But it also goes towards advocating for more involvement of the private sector in organizations like the WHO. So we do know that controlling conflict of interest in the UN and in the WHO was a problem before. And so the mechanisms that do exist, for example, if we keep to the WHO, there's the framework for engagement with non-state actors, also called the FENSA. And the FENSA is quite weak, actually, if you look at it. So it does not completely control the conflict of interest that can arise and that will arise if industry is allowed a seat at the table. But FENSA is still perceived as too strict by the industry. And so they are pushing, by lobbying the US government, they're also pushing for the US government to intervene on behalf of the industry and say that they deserve a bigger role in how health policy is defined. And so if we want to make a connection to something that's happening right now, to the World Health Assembly, which is taking place in Geneva these days, just yesterday, the US came out with quite a strong statement, which referred to multi-stakeholderism. And so multi-stakeholderism is exactly what the industry wants to see. It's a concept that basically invites them to the WHO, it invites them to the UN, and it asks for their feedback and their engagement with the policies that are being made. So having the US delegate reading out a statement like that at the WHO, it does show that indeed there is much to read out of the report that we have seen published. Lately.
Right. Thank you so much, Anna, for talking to us.
Thanks.
And our final story is a tragic and horrific incident from the United States, where an 18-year-old teenager murdered 19 young students, shot them dead in the state of Texas. He's believed to use a handgun and possibly a rifle. This is the second such mass shooting in a fortnight and the 8th such incident this year in this country. Now, in the aftermath of the incident, US President Joe Biden made a very impassioned plea. Politicians from across the aisle expressed their thoughts and prayers. However, the fact question remains about why and how is it that young people can gain access to such weapons in the United States? Why is it that no efforts are being made to stop the proliferation of such weapons? We talked to Zoe Alexander of People's Dispatch for more on this issue. Thank you, Zoe, so much for joining us. So another tragic incident of shooting, of course, and we do know that after each of these incidents, there's usual condemnation by politicians across across the spectrum, both Republicans and Democrats. But we also do see that there is a remarkable lack of action on this front, as is evidenced by the fact that such incidents keep happening again and again. And we've had, school shootings before, we've had shootings in churches, in malls recently. So how do we understand the failure of the US political establishment to actually do anything concrete to address this issue?
Yeah, it's so unfortunate that so many of these tragedies have had to take place in this country. There's a joke that after every single mass shooting, the politicians, people in positions of power, all they do is send thoughts and prayers, but actually no concrete action is taken. The U.S. is one of the countries in the world that has the most lenient gun control laws. There's really not much done on a state level, on a federal level, to really restrict this. It's a country with some of the highest levels of gun ownership. It is a society that is an extremely violent society that privileges violence in the media, in its foreign policy, in all levels of society. And so, unfortunately, this keeps happening. It's not an isolated incident. This is the most fatal and most with the highest number of casualties, this shooting since the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012, which is another horrific school shooting which took place at an elementary school. And really, it's just so unfortunate. So many parents and families that are now hurting. All of the students that had their place of learning, had their place of education, now become a site of violence, a massacre. And it's a uniquely American phenomenon. You don't hear about this happening in other countries. And really the question has to be asked why. And it can't really be addressed just through, there's been, after every school shooting, there's also some conservatives that come out and say that, oh, well, we need security guards in schools. There have to be teachers with guns, all sorts of crazy proposals. But really the root causes are not addressed, which is this extremely lenient gun control laws, the proliferation of guns across the country, and really this culture of violence, which feeds into this, the alienation, the isolation in the society, breeded by capitalism, and all of these structural ills which isolate and people. So it's so challenging because it's really at the root of what American society is based on. And so at the end of the day, all politicians really can do is send thoughts and prayers, because they refuse to actually address these causes.
Absolutely. And this is evidenced by the fact that, once again, like I said, some of the key people who are now sending these thoughts and prayers and wishes are also going to speak at the convention of the National Rifle Association that is taking place in Texas as well. The NRA, of course, being a very key element in that structure, which prevents concrete action against, concrete action restricting use of guns. And we also see, like you said, that this is not really this is an issue where, again, seems to be a fair amount of bipartisanship in terms of refusing to take any action, because there seems to be some sort of, the Second Amendment, some sort of sanctity that is afforded to weapons of violence like these.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there are in the United States, there are some states that have more strict gun control laws, but it's a similar case to many structural issues and tragedies that exist in the United States. The tragedy of poverty, the tragedy of hunger, of homelessness, all of these issues. Of course, gun violence in these school shootings is another level and a more extreme manifestation. But all of these issues, which politicians across the spectrum claim that they're dedicated and invested in addressing, that it's in everyone's interest to solve. But at the end of the day, their interests really lie with these corporate lobbies, the lobbies which run Washington, whose money pays senators extra salaries, who really, those are the people that they're loyal to. It's not the people. It's not protecting the people. It's not actually looking out for what's best for them. Even though they say that protecting the Second Amendment is really what's in the interest of American people. But it's just another example of politicians and the people in power in this country putting corporate interests above the lives of people. And it's so tragic that it keeps happening. I'll say it again, because it's really the fact that kids can't go to school without having their lives, at stake that teachers who are playing the most crucial role in our society, educating children, educating young people, are being killed. It's so sad that our political establishment is refusing to actually get to the issues here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zoe, for talking to us. We'll be following this issue in the coming days as well. That's all we have time for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from across the world. Until then, keep watching People's Dispatch.